Texas keeps producing these sort of like low testosterone males that pop into the space.
James Tallarico kind of feels like he's made from the same laboratory wherever they made Brylan Hollyham. They just use different
100%.
ingredients.
All of that happens, and then in the wake of me pointing out a pretty horrific failure of not knowing who your personnel is, turned around and dropped a lawsuit on me. So like the timing of it, very specific, and there is no chance that Jeffrey Epstein, who had a primary location in Manhattan, that man did not have a counterintelligence investigation into him with all the circles he ran in, with all the power that he was rubbing shoulders with. We should be really worried about that happening from our FBI right now. And I've already lost sleep over this stuff because the implications are so wild.
The idea that they sort of like formed undisclosed like sub-agency within an agency. That's a really heavy way to end it.
Meme Ranch.
What's up, everyone? I'm Kaelan Deese, host of the Meme Ranch podcast. I have an exciting guest on here today. It's going to be Kyle Seraphin. He's a former FBI special agent and has a plethora of stories to tell. Remember to give us a like, a follow, and hey, if you like the channel, give us a subscription and ding that notifications bell because we have more episodes coming your way in the weeks to come.
All right, Kyle, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you coming on for the second episode of this podcast. And let's just kind of start off the bat with some of the breaking news that happened last night there in Texas. I know that you yourself are a Texas resident, and just kind of looking at the playing field right now, obviously James Tallarico is going to be taking on the Democratic slot. He beat Jasmine Crockett, but we still don't know yet what's going to happen with this Trump endorsement. Apparently Trump wants the person that he endorses, either Ken Paxton, AG there in Texas, or Senator John Cornyn. Whoever he winds up choosing, he wants that person to step out of the race. And word on the street is that it seems like, at least in the preliminary stages, that Trump has surprisingly been looking at Cornyn as being the endorsement. Now, we don't know if that's actually going to happen. He might wind up still going with Paxton. But I'm curious from your standpoint as a Texas resident, with how many people in the broader MAGA world seem to have so much distrust of Cornyn, what would a move like that be if Trump decided to go against the more logical MAGA pick such as Paxton?
I see a lot of people say a bunch of ridiculous things. It's maybe one of the arguments against the amount of people that we have voting in this country. I'm not a big fan of universal suffrage. I actually think it leads to really bad outcomes because I've seen how people vote with their time and their money and the way that they live their lives. And I just think, I don't want you making decisions on my behalf. You're not even making good decisions on your behalf. But that being said, I was sitting in this X space, and sometimes I like to go in and just kind of lurk in these spaces and just hear what people have to say. And this was a MAGA space that is a regular feature that happens on Tuesday nights, and they call it Trump Tuesday. So I'm sitting here listening to these people talk, and I heard a woman say one of the funniest things that you could imagine. She said that when Donald Trump endorses the candidate that I like, I know that he means that endorsement means that I'm supposed to vote for him, and he also likes that candidate. But when Donald Trump endorses someone that I don't like, he's trying to point out how bad that person is. So I know that he also doesn't like that person. And so therefore I know to vote against them. And that kind of tells you where I think a lot of people that vote based on not principles, but based on party alliances or based on sort of personality. And maybe Donald Trump is a proxy for my own, decision making. I see that a ton. It's really off-putting to me. I find it to be utterly incompatible with the way that I've lived anything in my life, but there are people that are like that. And I know that because I've listened to them say it. So I think that John Cornyn is one of the worst options, but you've also got endorsements of people like Lindsey Graham, and Lindsey Graham keeps winning. So there are plenty of analogs where this happens in other places. And I guess it must help some people. The general Texas consensus of the people that hang out with me are not going to like a John Cornyn. I think Ken Paxton is the better choice, but he's not a perfect choice, and we don't really have perfect choices out there. We just keep getting kind of mediocre people running for office. Some of the better choices don't make it through the primary, and our turnout in the primary, especially this last 24 hours, we're able to see it was slightly over 1 million people in a state that has almost 30 million. So I don't know what the total number of registered voters in Texas is, but I know it's a lot more than the 1 million that voted in the Republican, and about 2 million. It looks like 2 million and change, or 2.5 million on the Democrat side. So, midterms are kind of famously bad for turnout, which is kind of why you probably see the Republican side freaking out just a bit. And I wouldn't be surprised based on the lines. I actually accidentally drove to the wrong polling station, kind of a human experience. My wife gave me the wrong address, and I ended up at the Democrat polling location. You got to go to different ones for the different parties. So I pull in, and first of all, and you can appreciate this. I drive an F-250 4-door truck, and it's slightly lifted, and it has an off-road package, and it looks like a guy who would vote the way that I might vote drives that truck. And as I pulled in, all these people in the line, which was for this Democrat primary, like looked over their shoulder, and they all gave me the dirtiest look that I was pulling into the parking lot to come in there. They all looked very, very horrified that I was going to walk up and stand in line next to them. And so that was kind of funny. But there must have been 100, maybe 125 people that were waiting. I mean, it was around the block. The line was huge. And then I drove down to go do the Republican polling location for my precinct. And it was in a model house in a neighborhood that was almost all sold. And there was 3 cars in front. And, I walked in there and they had a couple little tables and there was no line at all. So if that's any indication about the excitement that we're going to see midterms, like Democrat versus Republican turnout, it's not a good sign for whoever he endorses. It may not make that much difference, but.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, they probably came up to you and they're like, that's not the Tallarico Mobile or the Crockett Rocket.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I had a lot of concern seeing the turnout yesterday with Democrats in Texas, because it really seems like there's a lot of enthusiasm there too. I mean, obviously it's a primary, so there's going to be that initial bump that Republicans only care whose name is actually on the general ballot typically, especially in times like this or midterms like this. But I am a little bit concerned that, whichever way Trump decides with the endorsement or whichever way the primary shakes out, I mean, you're going to run into that low enthusiasm problem if you get a Cornyn, someone like that for November, or you're going to get, potentially an unforced error for the optics perspective with Paxton, because while Paxton, I believe on policy and on his achievements has really, been lockstep with what the MAGA agenda has been about, especially a lot of voters in Texas feel that way. I just know that, his scandals and the fact that Tallarico is supposedly this big, Christian, moral, love your neighbor kind of person. Like, I feel like it's really going to be sort of like an easy target for people in Tallarico's campaign to make Paxton look bad and to sort of drive out that support. I mean, I give Paxton, my sincerest, hopes that he can, sort of pull through, or maybe Trump will decide. Because I think that, from like a winning standpoint, like if we're in the spirit of winning, you don't want to do something if you're Trump. You don't want to do something to really kind of jade your biggest supporters by doing something that would seem like the biggest betrayal, which is going with Rhino Cornyn. But it's just such a tough category. I mean, we know that if Crockett would have won, Paxton would have been an easy yes, coming from Trump's standpoint. But now that it's this situation that we're in, it's going to be really interesting to see where he goes, if he decides to follow the base logic or the more Eastern, Washington D.C. kind of strategist logic.
I don't think that Tallarico presents a problem for people that are worried about scandals or worried about morality. He's a very fake type Christian. Mm-hmm. You hear the stuff he says; they're not compatible with any mainstream teachings in any sort of orthodox mentality about Christianity. His God is non-binary, and God would celebrate abortion for trans people and this kind of thing. Like, the stuff that comes out of his mouth is so wild.
He's citing Luke to be like, Mary was like given like a choice, like, or it was like the choice was yours. You could have aborted, the baby, if you didn't. That was an insane comparison that he tried, or insane logic they tried to pull out. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. So I think of him having that kind of silver-tongued, that likability, the palatability to a very specific audience. You see the people that are standing behind him at rallies. They're all young women. They're under the age of 35. They're childless. They're unmarried. I don't think that you're going to see, like, those women are going to side with a Jasmine Crockett. They're going to side with a Tallarico either way, if that's what they're going to vote for. Or if they're married and they have any sense of traditional values, or they have any sense of like looking for a better outcome, then they're going to go with not that guy. But he reminds me of a less masculine Beto O'Rourke, and Beto had like apparently this huge following, and he was super charismatic and everybody liked him, and he was going to be this, major upset. And now he's back to eating dirt or whatever it is that he's doing these days. And so, Texas keeps producing these sort of like low testosterone males that pop into the space. Like I said, Tallarico has even less of that. It doesn't mean he's not incredibly dangerous as just a general politician, because he sounds good until you listen to the words that he says. And I think a lot of people, there was this old joke about, it's like 90% how you sound and how you look, and it's only 10% about what you actually say. And so people would listen. The difference between communicating on radio and television, the old JFK discussion. This is like a guy that if you didn't listen to his words, if you just watched his mannerisms, you saw that he had coiffed hair. He's not offensive to women in any meaningful way. He's not threatening. His words sound really soft, even though they're like aspiring to like paganism. He's making pagan arguments while putting on this kind of Christian hat, and it makes all the pagans love it. I don't know that flies in Texas. I think the fact that Valentina Gomez also had a real rough night in my district, that kind of same attitude where Texans kind of sniff out fakes. I'd like to believe that's the case. I grew up in Texas. I think Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, like there's some regular people in a lot of the states, and they just kind of look and they just go, "You're not it. Sounds nice. Wish you luck, but not to represent me in DC." I guess we'll see. I'm hopeful that's not the case because he's everything that I would want a senator not to be.
Yeah, no, it reminds me so much of being from Oklahoma. I was covering the few years ago was the Republican primary challenge to James Lankford, and I remember there was a man by the name of Jackson Lemire who was really kind of trying to push the Mike Lindell kind of brand, like we're gonna do a little podcast on the side, and while we're trying to run for Senate, and he just kind of rung as a snake oil salesman, even though James Lankford has had many blunders and really upset a lot of Republicans in the state of Oklahoma just with some of his proposals, like during the Biden administration, trying to do this weird border wall measure or border security measure that would have basically just kept letting in illegal immigrants. Still, for some reason, I think a person like James Lankford comes across as a more principled type of candidate that whether you disagree with one or two things he's done, like he still doesn't come across like he is insincere in some of his other categories. But it'll be interesting to see. I was telling people the other day, James Tallarico kind of feels like he's made from the same laboratory wherever they made Brylan Hollyhan. They just use different 100%. Ingredients, ingredients for the process.
Somebody sent me a message on X and they said, Seraphin, it's up to you now. You got to help get rid of this guy. And I was like, first of all, I have nothing to do with it. But if anybody wants to put me into a Thunderdome match where we both walk in and only one walks out, like I'll do that. I'm probably 15 years older than he is. But I'll step into a Thunderdome match if that's what it comes down to. But yeah, they don't look like they would be a threat. I got a buddy who's a Green Beret. He said something to me that it will always stick with me because when he asked me, he goes, "Is it weird that I think about men and I evaluate them based on how hard I think it would be to end them?" And I go, "No, I think all men kind of have that instinct. That's a masculine thing." And Tallarico doesn't seem like the kind of guy that would be that threatening to most average strength men with just any degree of physicality to them at all. I'm fairly confident he hasn't done like a lot of digging of ditches or plumbing work or run a saw or anything like that. He just looks soft. And he's like what do we call him? An indoor dog.
Indoor dog is a good way to put that. Yeah.
But there's a lot of women that like indoor dogs. I don't know why you want to have an animal that's prey and doesn't protect you, but there are plenty of people that are interested in that. And so, he won the primary, so good for him. And there was a lot of enthusiasm standing in those lines. There was a lot more signage. There was a lot more sort of, energy around the Democratic primary and the voting locations that I saw. And so, there's a big uphill sort of slog for the Republicans if they want to win it.
Yeah, and speaking of weird, candidate quality, I think it speaks a little bit closer to the kind of the reason why I wanted to have you on right now is kind of talk about this weird division that we're seeing. I mean, it feels like grifters are at an all-time level right now in the right movement. Speaking of Valentina Gomez, moving from Missouri to Texas to just get like 8 points of the vote, and
she got 9. I think it went up to 9. So
I'll give her that. I'll give her that.
Give her the 9. Where do you think she moves next with that traveling circus? Where do you think it goes next?
Gosh, I don't know. Like upstate, just north of Oklahoma. I don't know.
I kind of been flipping with it could be Arizona.
Florida, yeah,
and Arizona. Florida both look good. Nobody wants her though. I did conduct a poll online, and the answer was STFU and Vanish was the overwhelming winner by about 70%. So,
well, there's an interesting horseshoe happening there with like the ideas that she espouses, like the idea that she's so obsessed with Muslims now. It's like I'm not going to be the person that is going to be chomping at the bit to defend Muslims or their religion or people of Muslim nations. It's like I think that our values as a America completely fundamentally don't comport with that of say Iran. But she seems to always have that fixation. It's almost like she's like trying to like push this issue that just not a lot of people are that passionate about. Like no one really wants to talk about how much they hate Muslims all day. But it's like she seems to be like
she's a cartoon of what somebody might think somebody on the hard right would look like. And so, she's in the same category of people like Jake Lang, who came out of the January 6th controversy. And, his famous story was that he was smashing cops with a baseball bat on January 6th. And I think he's probably a guy that's going to end up in prison. I'm not real great at predicting things, but I've seen some behaviors that you can see is a pretty good indicator you're not going to have a great outcome. And that's the kind of thing. Like Valentina Gomez either ends up as an OnlyFans somewhere, or she ends up in prison for doing some sort of white collar fraud. Because if you looked at the way that she ran her campaign, it looked like she was giving money to her brother, and she had them. They got criminally trespassed for going to bother John Carter, who's my current representative. And so I'm not a huge fan of John Carter because he's 84,000 years old. And yet, you can't just show up in a hotel where there's other things going on and then try to make a nuisance of yourself and expect there's not going to be a law enforcement interaction. For a lady who's supposedly all about law and order and American principles and making sure she keeps everybody safe, she's out there tying up like 3 or 4 of Round Rock's finest only a couple of days ago. And the body cam footage did not look good. I mean, it all looked bad. The brother was being antagonistic. So I see that we're going to continue to see these people pop in. I think there's a lot of money to be made because I don't know what that woman does for a living. There's a number of these people when you see them, it's like, what's your track record? Can we just have a regular America where we go, this is what I've done with my life. These are my values. And this is why I'd like you to, this is why I think I can represent you well, because I think that you're like me. If the answer is I was born in Colombia and then I grew up in New Jersey, I was a D1 swimmer, I don't have a job, I don't need a job, and I'm going to come and make social media videos about burning a Quran or shooting a dummy that's tied up to a chair and say we should waterboard everybody. I don't know who your constituency would be. She's 27. She's unmarried. She has no children. There's nothing particularly conservative about any of those things. And then she was making these advertisements talking about how she was going to help defend our wives and daughters. Like, thank you very much. Like, I'm a man with a beard. I work out 5 times a week so that I can make sure I can defend my wife and daughter. I don't need some random chick who can run fast with like some Oakleys on. It's not going to defend anybody in my house. It's just it's a really weird sales pitch.
Yeah, to me, I think the best way I can encapsulate it is it feels like they're trying to emulate this maybe proven success story that's been good for a couple of different people about trying to ride on the coattails of President Trump. And they've seen people like, I don't know, the current FBI director or the former deputy director, people like that who maybe did it in like the perfect way that it worked out for them. But these people are like, they're like if you look up trying hard in the dictionary, it's like you're going to see Valentina Gomez or Jake Lang and stuff like that. And I'm curious about like the ways, like the performativeness of some of the people that have actually made it and gotten into the administration. Oh, disconnected there for a second. But the performative elements of it that was able to help usher people like Kash Patel or Dan Bongino into their ranks, and to see where even those figures are at. Still kind of like winds up, as a longer process and they're more official, but there's still kind of a disappointment to some people. And what do we make of the current situation involving the FBI? It seems like we're staring at a situation where Kash Patel is always trying to be out in front of a story before it actually develops. He winds up saying some things that maybe aren't true or still need proper, vetting with additional law enforcement, whoever they're working with on the ground. And it just comes across as trying to impress the crowd, which is exactly what I see these types of people like Valentina Gomez or Jake Lang or et al. And where do we really, what's the actual measure of success that we've seen from this FBI? I know you have your, different criticisms about Patel, but where is he at right now? And is he making the FBI better, or is it just all for show, in your opinion?
No, I think a lot of it is for show. There's a couple of small measures that have actually been implemented, and interestingly enough, I found out about one of them yesterday. A friend of mine told me that one of the policies that I had recommended to Kash before he had been confirmed was something they actually moved forward with, which is a really good idea. And amusingly, my friend said it's resulted in the best personnel that you could imagine being in those jobs. I'll tell you what that is in just a second. But more broadly, as far as that performative nature and whether or not it actually works, we've all heard the expression, if you've ever been around Washington, D.C., that politics is show business for ugly people. And it is. And, occasionally you actually get to see it in action. That we don't mind people pretending, and we don't mind people playing a role, but you got to be consistent. You have to be believable. And if I can see the strings of what's pulling on you, then it really takes me out of the moment of being able to buy into it. Like Jim Jordan is a great example in my world. When I watch him, I think that Jim Jordan is making things up, because I've tried to deal with Jim Jordan's office and I had really negative experiences with it. They basically came to me when they wanted something and they ignored me when I said something that was inconvenient to them.
Was that back whenever Russell was still there?
That was back when this would have been 22 and 23 when we were bringing nonstop whistleblower disclosures to them.
Right.
But I understand that Jim Jordan is believable to people who don't know, because I regularly interact with those type of people and they go, I thought he's one of the good guys. And I go, I understand why you think that way. So I don't think badly of people who think other than I do. I just had some personal experiences that have led me to, taken me out of that moment where I can suspend disbelief and believe that the role that this person projects, is actually who they are. The Valentina Gomez types, oftentimes Kash Patel, they let the veil slip. They let the mask slip too much. And you get to see too much of the actor that's behind and not the role that they're pretending to be. So whenever we see these people do this, you have to be a little bit more artful. And the reason why, I think, is because Americans have a much shorter attention span, and we also have a much longer memory. So we have two things that are happening simultaneously. We don't have time for a lot of your BS. We're not going to let you butter us up forever and tell us. But also, we remember what you said 15 seconds ago. We have the Internet archives where we can go back and find a quotation where Donald Trump said he was the president of peace. We can find the times when Kash Patel went on, with Glenn Beck and said, I'm going to, destroy the Intel component, break it out and get rid of it, because that's the biggest thing. It has to be broken to 1,000 pieces. I'm going to shut down the Hoover building. So we remember these moments because, unlike maybe even 15 years ago, we didn't have those little tiny clips. Like a guy like me sitting here at this desk that I'm sitting at would not have a archive of videos that I could, 1, search, 2, rip, and 3, be able to punch out on social media whenever I needed to make a point. That didn't exist. That capability didn't exist. So we have this longer institutional knowledge between all the people that have expectations than we've ever had before, specifically on the FBI. So that's my personal bugaboo. So for people that don't know, I worked for the FBI for 6 years. I was on an unpaid suspension from the FBI for 14 months, which is a really fancy way of saying that I didn't work there for 14 months, but they pretended like I did. And during that time, they investigated me, they came after me, and I started kind of talking out aggressively about how do we fix this problem. And I did so to the likes of people like Dan Bongino, who ended up as the deputy director. I had interactions starting with Kash Patel maybe in November of 2022, and then moving forward right up until the point where he was confirmed. So I have this kind of interesting lens where I've been calling out what I think are the problems as a person who worked in DC for 5 years, who went out to the field and also did 20 different TDYs to different field offices. So I saw a lot more of the FBI than somebody might see in 6 years if they had just, stayed in one position, which I didn't. And then I also found this strange moment where when I was leaving the Bureau, I was a COVID objector. I didn't get the COVID shots. I mentioned that I wasn't going to do that. I became a religious objector as well. And so I had some requests for accommodation that didn't happen. But I guess the stuff that I did that was unlike anybody else, I reached out to every person that was a conscientious objector to the COVID shots in the Bureau. And I was able to get together a huge support network of about 300 people that touched every single division, that touched every single field office and all the headquarters components. And so I got to look behind the scenes that very few people got, because I had people in every location that were talking about COVID policy and hypocrisy and so on. And we came up with some really good solutions to those problems, because we saw the way that government overreach happens. We saw what weaponization looked like, not because I saw it in a hearing and not because I read a news story that somebody wrote. I lived it because they came after me and they came after my family. And so for credibility's sake there, I had the FBI subpoena my own social media, and I never had social media when I worked at the FBI. So all the social media that I had was created after I no longer worked there. And they came after all that and they got it. They got all my emails. As far as I can tell, they got everything I wrote in Gmail, and I've had a Gmail account since I was a teenager or since I came out of college. So they got 20 something years worth of Gmail.
Wait, repeat that. So you formed your social medias after you no longer worked there, but they still were able to get information about it.
Correct.
Wow.
So I know for a fact they got my Twitter. I know for a fact they got my Gmail. I have a True Social account. I can't imagine they wouldn't have gotten that as well. I have a Facebook nominally, and I have, a Rumble account and a YouTube, and I do all the kind of different things that I do for video. And so my guess is, and since YouTube is owned, under the same parent company as Google, it's all Alphabet, the odds of them getting access to all of that is very, very high. Now, there's a number of different mechanisms they could have used, but when I talk about weaponization, it looks like someone who used to be one of us, who's been calling out the problems with us, and we're going to go out there and use a grand jury subpoena and criminal process to go find out if we can get any dirt on him. And by the way, those resulted in nothing. I've never got a target letter saying that they were investigating me, and I've never got anything saying that they are no longer investigating me. What I know is they unsealed, because they were previously sealed, the grand jury subpoenas to get all this information. So months and months after the fact, in fact, I think it was in May of last year, I got notice from Google saying that they were now allowed to tell me that the FBI subpoenaed my records. And previous to that, I found out they got all my Twitter accounts. I think I found out in January of last year, right when Trump was getting in, that they had previously grabbed, my Twitter account started September of 2022 when is that right? Yeah, September of 2022, when I was no longer with the Bureau. I left the Bureau, officially I was suspended forever, June 1st of 2022. So everything was after my time there, and they still went after it. And there's been never an allegation that I was involved in anything criminal. So when I talk about weaponization, I'm just telling you from a very personal standpoint.
Yeah. You're also kind of, you were under weaponization under Biden. Your situation was being weaponized under Biden. It also, in some ways, feels like it's still happening with some of the ways that you've been targeted now in this. I don't know how much you want to get into it, but I'll just, say it, point blank. You're being sued for defamation by the literal girlfriend of the current FBI director.
That's right.
And not to mention that, but the fact that the current law firm that's representing her is also literally in the same building that houses Kash's charitable foundation.
It's the same people. Yeah, it's the same people. Yeah. So the Fight with Kash Foundation is run by Jesse Banal. The Banal Law Group is the firm that is representing Kash's girlfriend, Alexis Wilkins. So yeah, 100%. And by the way, I made a statement on a podcast, which I subsequently corrected because I was just a little bit confused about. I did some digging on who she was because I just didn't know. I never met the girl. The allegation was that I met her and therefore I knew that she was not something. And the fact is I never met her. And there's no evidence I ever would have been in the same room as her. In fact, the only time that I've met Kash exactly 2 times in person. One time was at the premiere for Police State, where we were both part of a movie. I helped it. By the way, that was a Dinesh D'Souza and Dan Bongino movie. And so I helped write all the action sequences. I helped choreograph the actors going through the blocking and the movement to be able to look like a real FBI agent when they were doing it. And I actually helped kind of script all the dialogue. So if there's ever any reenactments you see of FBI agents pretending to be FBI agents in the movie, to include now Congressman Brandon Gill, by the way, he was in the movie in kind of a small bit role. And I gave them all the lines. It was like, you're sitting in a car doing a stakeout. Like, what might you say? And so I gave them things that you might say in there, and they turned around and used them. That was with Nick Searcy. So that was kind of fun. That's one time I met Patel, was when we did the premiere for Police State at Mar-a-Lago. There was no Alexis there. And then the other time I met him, I was in Las Vegas in January of 2023. And there was no girlfriend there at all, because I remember him complaining about how all the women in Las Vegas were prostitutes. So, and he didn't have anybody he was dating at the moment. I've never met this girl.
Sounds exactly like something he would complain about.
It's a legitimate concern. My advice to him is get out of Las Vegas. You are in Las Vegas. What do you expect? Which is what a normal guy would tell another normal guy who said, everyone around here is a professional. It's like, yeah, well, you're in Las Vegas, buddy. Like, that's what they do here. So get out. The lawsuit thing popped up 5 days after I made a misstatement. I'd already corrected the misstatement. And, a lot of the stuff that I do on that podcast is in this like heavily satirical way. I say a lot of things in like really aggressive sarcasm. But at the end of the day, we got no cease and desist. We got no attempt to like, hey, straighten this out. Like, no, nothing. In fact, what I saw was the Fight with Kash Foundation influencers boosted the signal of my podcast in a very narrow segment that took away the context of what I was talking about. And then they went out and did, they went and did this like aggressive media push, and then I saw a lawsuit pop up a couple days later. It's like, give me a break, dude. Like, first of all, the same people that cut me a check for $10,000 because I'd lost my job from the FBI turned around and sued me. And then the funniest thing, Kaelan, is that they invite me to their Christmas party every year because I was an FBI whistleblower. So I've been invited to the people who are suing me's Christmas party, including after they served me with a lawsuit. I could have showed up in December at the Banal Law Group's Christmas party because I keep getting the invitations, which is really silly. Like, all of it is just, it's like theater of the absurd where I'm living through it.
Well, and I just want to interject too, because like the thing that's so egregious about this to me, Kyle, is that I'm not trying to flatter you here, but like you're a patriot. Like, you serve this country in multiple different ways. You're a father in Texas. You're a conservative guy, and so for all this to be unfolding is almost like this sort of like bitter, dirty laundry behind the scenes. Like, almost, I'm not gonna allege it, but just from an optics standpoint, the fact that it's not the director himself that's suing you, but it's his girlfriend that's suing you, and the fact that the statement that was made might come across as something that is hurting his role or would damage his look, almost like seems like it's like a by proxy like way of targeting, and that's the part that really rubs me the wrong way.
Well, those are all that's what it is. So you don't have to allege it. I'll say it. That's exactly what it is. Especially if you read the lawsuit, it's all about Kash Patel. It's everything about Kash. It's about his problems, and the real reason, I think, if we hone in on it, is that I am one of the more effective, and I'm certainly one of the more aggressive critics of his handling of the FBI, because there was a way to get it done and to do it properly, and he didn't do that. And the things that he actually has taken from the slideshow that we put together, because me and a couple of former FBI agents who are whistleblowers, a couple of guys who are retired, we spent, I don't know, 20, 30 hours together and put together a war game scenario. How do you take back the FBI and de-weaponize this animal that came after us and that could come after our families? And you'd think that Kash would want that. And the few suggestions that we gave him that he actually implemented, they're really successful. The ones that he didn't implement successfully, I've been pointing out to him over and over again. And there are about 40 different people that have been fired at the FBI because of my observations across social media. And I'm not saying that lightly. You can actually go see anybody that I call out by name ends up fired. They've created a Grim Reaper. Some of my buddies created a Grim Reaper meme where I'm knocking on the doors, and whoever I'm knocking on the door on is the person that I'm exposing. And then they end up terminated. Including people I didn't even realize were getting terminated because I was still calling them out and they were already gone. The guy comes to mind who was involved in the Arctic Frost investigation. So his name was David Geist. I was calling him out in January and I didn't realize they'd already fired him in November because I mentioned him in October for the first time, and then they canned him. So I've been unfortunately effective from the outside, kind of pointing out all their screw ups, And so the lawsuit was just one more kind of step on this. For whatever it's worth, this was the timeline. I pointed out maybe the most single damning moment of poor understanding of the animal that he was working at. Kash Patel was flying around in a jet, which is the FBI director jet, which is actually not for the director, but that's what he uses it. And his pilot was a guy named Chris Myers. Chris Myers was one of the agents that was on CR-15, which was involved in Arctic Frost. It was involved in some of the other investigations into Donald Trump. It was part of the Jack Smith special counsel. And so you got the pilot was on the cases that Kash was put in to basically correct those wrongs. And I pointed that out on social media, had a multi-million, views. And then they fired him, fired a guy named Walter Gardina, who also was involved in those cases, fired a guy named Spencer Evans, who I pointed out to Kash Patel, and I have the text messages to prove it. And then they ended up firing a couple of others, including a guy named Brian Driscoll, who apparently was a friendly, and then also a guy named Steve Jensen. So they fired 5 people, and it went over very poorly because immediately those people filed a lawsuit. The next thing he did was announce that he had made whole a bunch of whistleblowers. And so he reinstated, allegedly, some of my friends, which he didn't actually do, and said that he was giving back to a bunch of my friends. They just got checks a couple of days ago. And that dates back to like June, July of last year. So for 9 months, he was a liar about all that. And then to include just having like a guy that would have been necessarily questionable flying the jet around while you're having private conversations and in your immediate circle. And they turned around and dropped the lawsuit on me. So like the timing of it, very specific. The sort of fact pattern that led up to it is pretty damning. And so you don't have to allege it. I'll just tell you, it is very clear to me that this was Kyle Seraphin as being a boisterous critic, and I don't like that. So I'm going to make sure that he feels some pain. And it's very expensive. I haven't asked anybody for any money on it, but I've written checks for $20,000, and I'm not wealthy, and I don't make a ton of money, and I'm not like independently wealthy where I want to write $20,000 checks out. That was a significant chunk for me, but
I just
defend yourself.
And I just want to flash something on the screen for those that are listening, that are watching this. If I can bring it up a little bit bigger, you flagged this the other day. If I can maybe make it a little bit bigger, the point I want to make with this, or the point that I felt like you were also making, is that once Dan Bongino went back onto the airwaves as a private citizen, I mean, aside from the Trump interview, aside from the Kash Patel interview, I mean, man, oh man, his ratings are just not what they were before he was in the FBI. And I was making a joke the other day to somebody. I was almost sort of like sarcastically referring to the Katie Miller podcast as state media, because she's able to get every single person in the administration, but none of the interviews are actually that substantial. They're just kind of quality of life, kind of like, oh, here's
I call it the official podcast of the White House.
It's the official podcast, and it feels like, I mean, maybe it's like a half step down, but it almost just kind of feels like the White House studios, what do you even call it? Like the Disney equivalent or the Warner Brothers equivalent. It feels like Dan Bongino is kind of their second asset in that Avengers world of state media podcasts that they're trying to push, because that's really what it is. After you go into the FBI and you basically don't even have to atone or explain for any of the things that people wanted you to do or thought you were going to do, now you just get to go on and sort of be a cheerleader on the sidelines. And it seems like the fans and the people obviously don't like that. It seems like Dave Smith is doing a little better than Dan Bongino.
It's telling. A comedian who is a critic, and I think an articulate critic of the regime, and who Dan Bongino in this case decided to point out as someone that he was frustrated with. Like, yeah, that man has a much stronger showing. He gets rewarded with audience. And what you do is you end up calling out. I mean, I would have been tickled if he called me out as his biggest foe. He decided to go after a comedian, so fine, that's fine. He gets clowned on it, and you've seen where that grows. But it's almost like it's like the Voldemort thing. Like, there were two babies. You could have picked anybody, but you chose the person, and by doing it, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that the person that you pick as your foe ends up being the person that can defeat you. That's what's going on with Dave Smith right now, as far as I can tell. You picked a guy. You said that he was wrong. It's pretty clear that the public get a choice, and they're voting with their time and their interest, and they're voting with their ears, and they're voting with their advertising dollars, and that's what it looks like. And what's amazing is you mentioned the audience is smaller than what it used to be. I may or may not know the people that sell the advertising to the Bongino show, and he's charging twice what he did before he went into the bureau, and his audience is not even quite as big as it was previously. So there's a lot of ego. There's a lot of expectations. I think Dan Bongino is one step above limited hangout with Sean Hannity, which is the new Fox podcast that they just announced. Like, just what we need, more Sean Hannity. And he called it hangout with Sean Hannity. So I put limited in kind of brackets, but it's kind of implied that you're getting a guy who wore a CIA lapel pin for years on the air. It's, look, what are we doing here? It's just
I DM'd that to a friend the other day. I was like, absolutely nobody asked for this Sean Hannity show. Like, literally nobody.
It's a meme. It's literally the meme. The meme is like, it's like nobody. And then it's like Sean Hannity. Like, would you like to hang out with Sean Hannity? It's like, no,
not really.
I would not. I would like to avoid that. In fact, I don't watch Fox News for a reason. Please don't come into my space.
I want to ask you one more question that you briefly touched on before we move on to other subjects like Iran and Epstein. But you mentioned that there was one point that they had taken up recently that they followed through on. One of your advice points. Well, did you already say it?
It's a brilliant idea. It's super simple. Are you ready?
Yeah.
The way the FBI works, the way that it structures the Hoover building, and now it's the Reagan building, but the way that they got people to come to FBI headquarters was to essentially request or advertise the position in a massive financial gain so that people basically couldn't not come to headquarters. All the decent case agents, all the people that have lives that don't want to be in Washington, D.C., they're not going to go and work for the headquarters building. So what happened is they would do these 18-month-long TDYs. This is the historical, like, Jim Comey era. They would recruit people to come to headquarters for 18 months. And while they were there, they were 100% on what's called TDY or temporary duty. So they would get paid per diem. So your meals are covered, and they would get paid a lodging fee. And so they could go there and make a bunch more money. They could even buy a house and still have access to that. And then the real kicker was when you're in the field, you're working at the pay rate of a GS-13. So General Schedule 13, that's like an agent doing the investigations. When you took that headquarters TDY, you'd become a 14, and that's a supervisory rank. So it's roughly 10 years worth of promotion and pay jump that you would get immediately and overnight. And then the key was after that 18 months, you'd go back to the field and you'd go back to being a 13, but you'd keep that pay bump. So you'd go from being a 13-1 or a 13-2 to being a 13-10. And it would be 10 plus years worth of pay raises all at once that you got over 18 months. So that's why people did it. Kash Patel discontinued the 18-month TDY. Under Ray, they actually took away the pay bump, so you didn't get to keep it anymore. So they took away that incentive. Kash Patel finally killed off that program. But my recommendation was stop making people come to headquarters. Let them stay in the field. If they're going to remotely manage things like programs, which is basically, let's say you're going to handle all of the drug cases that are in these 5 field offices through headquarters, you have one point of contact. If you're the case agent, you'd reach out to your program manager at the Hoover building or now at the Rager building, and they would go, okay, cool. Like, what do you need for money? What do you need for resources? Hey, we have these specialty teams. Have you ever thought about trying these tactics or techniques? Would you like to do this or that? And so they're trying to help you theoretically from the headquarters side where the big budget is. Why do you make that person go to Washington, D.C. if they don't want to go? You're only going to get people that are willing to go to Washington, D.C. So my idea was let program management happen from the field, and then you're going to get the dads who have kids they don't want to pull out of school, and they have wives that have jobs or whatever, or they have a church that they're really dedicated to being part of, and they don't want to go to Washington, D.C. and uproot their whole family and their life. You're going to get a different quality of people, and they've done that. They've started letting people become program managers from the field. And in doing so, they've essentially got all the best capabilities of the FBI where somebody might take a pay boost, work as a headquarters body, work a headquarters job, but never actually leave the place that they're at. And it's resulted in the best possible people that want to stay close to the actual work. And the best part is they're close to the work. So they actually know what it's like when they're doing they just were a case agent a few minutes ago. They still are sitting in a space next to other case agents. So they don't forget what the FBI does by going over to Washington, D.C. and being detached. That was one of the best ideas. And I heard yesterday that it was very successful.
Yeah, well, it's good that they're at least they're not perfect and they're less than that by a large margin, but I could say at least from a lot of the more cursory elements of this. I mean, here's the thing: it's a lot of big promises. I mean, Kash Patel recently just said that he was going to reveal in the coming months Antifa funding networks.
I saw that.
Good for him if he's able to do that.
But stay tuned. You notice the way he's doing it. He's doing it just like an actor would. It's cliffhangers.
Exactly.
This is what we used to do in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up watching TV. It was a really exciting episode. Stay tuned till next week and we'll finish it. That's what he did. And he did that on Dan Bongino's podcast of all places. So I'm sure he'll come back maybe in a couple of months. But the question is, will he hope that everyone just moved on and forgot about it? Again, we've got a very short sort of attention span, but we have really long memories for that little clip that you just talked about. I'll be playing that in a couple of weeks just to remind people, where's that Antifa funding? You promised something. Where is it? They told me that they reopened the case on the cocaine in the White House. Dan said that was his priority. He worked there for 9 months. He didn't get it. Who left the cocaine in the White House? If you're going to bring it up, then it's fair game for us to ask you where it is. And so we're going to ask about that Antifa funding network. There's been a lot of promises of bringing people to justice. You remember, they managed to get, 2 people, I think, that fall under the deep state target list. They got John Bolton's mustache, and they got Jim Comey, and that fell apart. I mean, that's not the villains that the MAGA people that I've been seeing thought they were going to get. Whatever happened to the Brennans and the Clappers, whatever happened to all the people that were involved in what they believe, the Obamas, the Clintons, et cetera, et cetera. If you were to go down the list of all the people that they thought were a problem and that MAGA was ranting about for years, how many of those people are going to go to prison? I'll just tell you now, none of them. So that you should be able to answer for that. It's like, look, maybe I misspoke. Maybe I overdid it. Maybe I overplayed my hand. This is all the sort of WWE theater where everybody's a villain when they're talking on the camera and then they all go get lunch together. You find this in Congress, in the halls of Congress too. They're yelling at each other in the middle of a hearing, and then they go back and buy each other's books for maximum value and make sure that, I'll buy a warehouse full of your books, you buy a warehouse full of my books, we could both justify them as campaign expenditures, and it goes right into your pocket. And I know for a fact that conversation happens because I have friends who've been in front of it and they went like, oh, well, that's how it happens. And it'll be a Democrat and a Republican. They'll be allegedly not friends.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to hear that kind of perspective. I wanted to kind of pivot now over to Epstein, because we just got news today that Pam Bondi's been subpoenaed by the Oversight Committee in the House, and I've been covering these hearings, gosh, since they started last year. And man, Kyle, I can't help but just kind of vent a little bit about it. That it feels like we've gotten nowhere closer to finding literally anything, even after we dragged in the Clintons. Comer's saying that's historical, but there's really, it feels like they're looking in all the wrong places. But I actually kind of, my ears perked up a little bit today when they actually successfully got that subpoena to Bondi, because the first thing that comes to mind is, well, good luck enforcing it, you know. But at the same time,
who's going to enforce that?
right? But at the same time, you know, if she does decide to come in, it actually, I think, could provide some of the best contextual information about how shoddy this rollout was of the Epstein information that we saw take place. So basically, since the beginning of the administration, up until just the last few weeks when they said they released everything, when we know that's not true. So I just wanted to kind of ask you, you know, what do you think Bondi really has to offer, and if she decides to testify, like, it seems like she's going to basically be able to give a lot more information, at least about this subject, given the fact that it was her duty that she was tasked to do to release it. I mean, do you think it's just going to be a world of embarrassment about how everything took place behind the scenes? What do you think?
I think she's going to try to obfuscate, and I think that she will sort of project a bunch of anger on things and try to direct the attention somewhere else. It seems like that's what we see, the lowest capabilities. The people that can stand on their records and that are articulate and intelligent human beings before they got there, they seem to do okay. They walk in front of these oversight hearings. They answer questions from both sides, and it doesn't matter if they're hostile or not. They diffuse them by just being rational, intelligent people. And then you see what Bondi does, and Bondi goes in there, and you know, between the two of us and the person that I was talking to, spoke to a member of Congress, said that you know, I was being generous when I said I personally think Pam Bondi has an IQ that must hover around 100, and I was told that I was being generous. She doesn't strike me as being that bright. What she does is she goes out there and theatrically feigns outrage. But the reason that we have the debacle of the Epstein rollout is because she went out and made promises, and then she didn't back any of them up. Nobody made her say those things. She went out on Fox News. She was desperate to get that spotlight. You know, the Epstein files are on my desk. Are we actually going to see those? Yes, we are. I'm ready to hand them out. They're going to come out in a couple of days. Then she comes back on and says some illogical things like they're being hidden at the Southern District of New York, which theoretically, by the way, answers to her as the Attorney General. So for the Attorney General to say that the Southern District of New York is basically an open rebellion against her office is actually an indictment of her capabilities in that space. It should say that you're not even probably fit for that job if you can't manage the animals that are underneath. There are plenty of United States attorneys' offices. If one of them thinks they can get away with not doing what you say as the Attorney General and there's no consequences, then are you really the Attorney General? And I think even more broadly, and this may go contrary to what your previous guest said, which I didn't listen to all of it, but there's this instinct that maybe the Epstein file, the situation is a big nothing. And I think we've had some information that has been presented recently that could actually make it way worse than what we think it is. And here's my argument. Here is the evidence, which is lacking, by the way. The lack of evidence does show you a certain amount of evidence. None of the files that have been released by the FBI indicate that there was a counterintelligence investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. And there is no chance that Jeffrey Epstein, who had a primary location in Manhattan, that man did not have a counterintelligence investigation into him, with all the circles he ran in, with all the power that he was rubbing shoulders with. He could be run as a victim. The FBI can open a full case on you as a potential victim, like maybe another country is targeting you, and there would definitely be reasons for that to be the case. We have evidence of that in the files. And then there's also the possibility that he's actually doing something nefarious, that he actually is, working on behalf of another nation or other nations, plural. And for those reasons alone, there's more than enough articulable basis to open a counterintelligence investigation, which would be long-ranging. It would never need to end just because of who he was and where he was. And we've seen nothing about that. And that alone tells me that there's a lot more. There's some other kind of like little, semantic arguments I can kind of help kind of flesh some of that out when you're ready.
Well, yeah. Before you get into that, I mean, does that mean, based off what you just said, does that mean that you would have a little bit of agreement with former Secretary of State's point that she made toward the end of her deposition, where Chairman Comer were seeking advice about where they should go, and her assessment was that they should essentially file subpoenas to the CIA, file them to DNI, file, try to get information from counterparts overseas, the equivalent over in the UK or the equivalent over in Israel. I mean, is that where the direction needs to go, is toward those types of agencies?
Yes, but I don't think you'll get anything. And I think that actually goes to the broader point, which is I don't think Jeffrey Epstein was unique based on what we're seeing right now. We just got some information, which I didn't recognize, was released last year in June. Chuck Grassley's office came forward and said that there was this thing called a prohibited access file inside the FBI's computer record system. The software is called Sentinel. I worked on it for 6 years. It's like where you keep your cases. It's your case management. If people have worked in a law firm, it's very similar to that. It tells you who's the manager of the case, who are the approving authorities, who are the people that are involved. And then it just organizes your thought process like any other kind of shared drive might. There's a list of them that's going to give you all of the the files that are part of it in sequence, like any other kind of like file management system. There are sub files and so on. But all of them have a certain amount of permission. Just like if you were to go to a Google document, or if you or I were going to share some kind of a shared drive, I might make a file available to you, but it's read only. Or maybe I'd make it edit only, but you couldn't delete it, right? So I can set the permissions under which you can interact with it. And Sentinel is exactly the same way. Whatever the user is, the person who creates a file, creates a case, they get to set certain permissions and certain access to it. And so as far as I knew, there were basically like 3 ways they could be set up. It was completely open. But it was read only to everyone who wasn't on the access roster, or it was what's called restricted. Restricted means that you can find it. You find out that there is in fact a case when you search it, but it maybe won't tell you the name of what's going on there. And then it'll have like a bunch of redactions internally where you'll find out who's running the case, but you won't be able to get any further than that. You won't know the name. You won't know the location. You won't know the file number, that kind of thing, right? So those were the 3 things that I was aware of. And it turns out there's a 4th. And the 4th one is so damning and so bizarre that the implications of it, you can't actually digest it and not think that the story of Jeffrey Epstein is probably not related to it. What there is a thing called prohibited access. And that means it's a place that you can only find if you actually know where to go. Reminds me of like the Isla de la Muerta in Pirates of the Caribbean, right? It's the island that you can only find if you already know where it is. You'd have to know what that file is to be able to get to it. And if you're not on the access roster, then you see nothing. And so this was described to me by FBI agents. It was a legendary thing that wasn't even supposed to exist. But this is a file that's exempt from searches internally, which means it's exempted from FOIA. It would be impossible to be able to find if you didn't know it was already there to be able to do any disclosures. And it also means that it's exempt from oversight, because how would you be able to find it? OIG can't find it. If people in the Bureau can't find it that are responsible for doing Bureau oversight. And apparently this is a program that falls directly under the deputy director. The deputy director has always represented the institutional power of the FBI. And it also means that there's plausible deniability to the director, because if it's not something that he's read in on and he can't find the file and he can't locate it in any way, then you now have something that is completely deniable. It's totally off books. And the sketchiness of it is there's a bunch of these things that would involve, let's say, illegal activities, things that you otherwise can't do, running against political targets. We already have some pretty good information. I talked to a whistleblower attorney who said that one of his clients was involved in a honeypot operation going after Donald Trump's campaign, and it was done through this prohibited access file, which means that you wouldn't be able to find it unless you knew it was already there. And if the people leave, then nobody has access to it anymore. And so this kind of capability, I think it tells a lot about what could happen with the Jeffrey Epstein type. If there's people that want that counterintelligence information, if they want to actually have, a solid national security grab, because we found out that Israel, in the permanent mission to Israel from the UN, was doing physical security at his apartment as well as technical security. Did you read those drops, or you seen this kind of like? I'll let you talk.
No. Yeah, keep remind me again this, because I might be.
So Dropsite News was the first that reported it. I saw it on Megyn Kelly's podcast with Ryan Grim, who was the one. The long and short of it is, and people may see the clips on it, but the implications are really specific. There was a back and forth between Epstein and people that were involved in Epstein's security at his apartment and the Israeli permanent mission to the UN.
Yes.
And they were setting it up because Ehud Barak was a regular visitor, guest, whatever, occupant of that apartment.
And they installed like security cameras inside the apartment.
Yeah, so you have hardware and software that's going to be involved in that. Well, here's the deal. If the Israelis are involved in setting up physical security at your private residence in New York City, the easiest thing that happens when you want to infiltrate an intelligence person into another country, we put them in various different ways. The United States does the same thing. There's a thing called official cover, which means you work ostensibly for the agency. You work for the embassy or you work at a consulate, or maybe you work at a permanent mission to the UN. But that's how you do it. You double hat them. So they have some job that's overt, then they have a dual function that's covert in the intel space. And we know that happens for a lot of different agencies. A lot of different people send in their official cover spies, their intelligence operatives. And that's a common thing. It's just that's the cost of doing business in the world of diplomacy. But for Israel to have access to this guy's apartment and the people that were going through that apartment and the people that were friendly with Jeffrey Epstein and the circles in which he traveled, there's no question that he would be an intelligence get. He would be a great cutout. He would be certainly a target, if nothing else, for recruitment. But if the Israelis know that, so does the CIA and the National Resource Group, which operates domestically to do exactly that. Grab Americans that travel abroad and are of high profile and that might have access to things that we would want. And if the CIA and the NR knows about it, then you 100% know the FBI has to be involved and know, and so is the NSA and probably some other components that fall under ODNI. So you have all of that question of like, he belongs to intelligence, this sort of like unable to verify Acosta statement that was supposedly made in 2016 during a vetting for Donald Trump when he was putting in the cabinet. That question, if he belongs to intelligence, what people were saying, this is actually hard proof that says, okay, we know for a fact the Israelis were involved in the security. It's a very, very simple logical inference to say that their intelligence assets would have been engaged. And that necessarily means the U.S. intelligence sphere is also involved. And if the FBI is involved, and there's basically no chance that he wasn't because he's running around in New York City, and he's a big fish in that pond. That means that deniable access programs would mean that the FBI probably was greenlighting some of the stuff, because if you're getting good intel, I know for a fact that people that are doing good intel gathering don't mind if you're kind of a shady character. That's kind of the trade-off when you bring in a good source or you bring in someone that's going to give you stuff. You may not like them as a person. You'll just like what they provide you access to. And so, I think that this prohibited access file system, it opens up a whole world of capabilities. And by the way, they're unsearchable and they're going to be unaccountable to anything that Tom Massey, Ro Khanna, MTG, or anyone else passed as a law, because it's not responsive to a query. And so then you have this shadow, governmental organization that's operating within the FBI that allows them to do stuff that they can't otherwise legally do, but there's no proof they did it. And the only proof is inside the group of people that signed off on it. And we know that some of these actions took place. Some of them were definitely political, and they certainly were things that were not necessarily above board. Maybe nominally they check the boxes. But once we start realizing that the FBI has a little subterfuge that's going on where they don't have to answer to anybody, it's the same reason why we ended up having a church commission. I mean, you cannot have unelected, unaccountable, exempt from oversight intelligence operations going on, certainly not on U.S. soil. And that was kind of the big deal in the 60s and 70s that people worried about. We should be really worried about that happening from our FBI right now. And I've already lost sleep over this stuff because the implications are so wild when you start letting your head go, because there's no way to prove that they didn't do stuff. And worse is that if you knew that they did it, and there's been plenty of information, here's how you know some things went down that were shady and how other intelligence agencies were involved. Prince Andrew was arrested, right? The former Prime Minister of Norway was arrested. The British ambassador to the United States was removed. Like, there have been heads of industry all over the place that have lost jobs. There have been people who have now been put in handcuffs. Are you trying to tell me you think that those foreign intel services didn't know what their politicians were up to in the United States? There's no chance they didn't know. Right. We share stuff with the Brits. So we would have known, they would have known, and now they know that it's uglier if they don't act. So they're doing theater for us. There's no question that they knew what Andrew was up to the entire time.
So you kind of like half disagree, half agree with the critics. Like, on the agreeable point, it's like, this is sort of a trumped up predicate. This is a predicate that doesn't necessarily actually get to the core meat of like what the allegations were, because obviously they're going after Andrew and Mandelson for essentially exchanging state information that they weren't allowed to share, things like that. But they're doing it because they have to be part of it. It is a show, but it's a show so they don't have to go deeper into what you're espousing, essentially, right?
Yeah, look, if you have blackmail compromat on people, what would you rather get arrested for? Sharing the state secrets that you were giving to the guy who had the blackmail on, or would you rather go and explain exactly like what kind of a dirtball you are and get killed in prison? So I think that they're admitting to a lighter situation, and they're doing this theater for us to say that there are actions, but you notice that none of them are over the things that Epstein was accused of being involved in. And here's the wild part. There's DEA files that are in the Epstein files, which means there were probably drug trafficking. There's probably money laundering that's involved, because that's usually how DEA comes onto somebody's radar. Like, they find somebody because they're doing movements of shady amounts of money or moving things in shady, illogical ways. And so who knows what this guy could have been involved in? He probably had a little bit of everything if you were going to go down to it. My buddy, who is a very long-term veteran intel guy, says when you have somebody that's an access agent like that, in other words, they travel in a circle, they have access to people that are in government in foreign countries, and they can go there without any kind of diplomatic requirement. If they can interact with people who have significant amounts of wealth in the private sector, and you're kind of someone who can go and set up those meetings, like that's a very useful thing for an intel service, to have someone that can arrange little bumps at parties, at private gathering, can send an email and have somebody show up to be there and then walk away from the table so a conversation could be had. That's something that people do. And the question is what all was he involved in? And I think that it's like, to assume that it was about the trafficking of women, which may have been his sexual proclivity, it could be a lot worse than that. And so are we going to get those files from the CIA, though? No. Are we going to get ODNI to open their books and share that stuff with us? No. Remember, Mike Johnson said one of the reasons why we can't share this stuff, even at the FBI, reason number 4, he said, was national security. Well, there's no national security implications to a guy that just happens to have a taste for women who are under the age of consent on the federal statute. That's not a reason why you would have a national security problem, unless you had a national security problem that also coincided with that. And so we've already been given all those sort of little pieces of it. And we're also seeing they're nipping around the edges to try to keep people at bay with all these different people stepping down and walking away from their companies, and leaving the board positions that they had, and arrests of people for things that were not what the salacious allegations are. I actually don't think we're going to get all of it. I don't think that we'll necessarily have access to any of that. But I think that the American people also are going to have a very long memory on this, and that's only proven because they've already had a long memory on this, and it's not going anywhere. So they're in a bad spot, and I think Pam Bondi probably doesn't even have access to the files we're talking about, nor would she have the time to see them. If you're actually doing the job of AG, you wouldn't. So she's just set up to look more and more foolish.
Yeah, and the disappointing thing is that she's not going to ever be able to even speak to anything that you were just saying. And I think that's like the most disgraceful part of it, is that the idea that they sort of like formed like essentially a almost like an undisclosed like sub agency within an agency, essentially, is what it seems like you're describing.
Yeah, I used to joke about this. So I grew up in the era when the X-Files was a big thing. I've got a poster of the X-Files on my wall. It's probably one of the reasons why I went to the FBI. And in the X-Files, there was this like shadowy group of people that were doing nefarious things, and it was led by this guy who they called the cigarette smoking man. And he was just this kind of dark guy that would come in and make, he would give information, but he was also kind of a bad guy, but he was also working on behalf of this group of men that would all meet in this dark room, smoke cigarettes in the dark without the lights on. They would all talk about like bad ideas. They would have these like weird scripted lines where one guy would be, it was like having a regular dialogue where they deleted like every third line or every second line. So they would say things and finish each other's sentences. And I used to tell people, it's like, that's not what the deep state is. The deep state is not a bunch of like shadowy, nefarious dudes wearing dark suits, smoking cigarettes in an office that come in and plan the world's demise, and then they walk away and then they go do all these dastardly deeds. Like, that's not what it's about. But more and more, it's looking like there are people that probably do that kind of thing. And whether they're like what Tucker Carlson said, whether they're a supra-government type of organization or a group of people, so above all the governments and handing down their marching orders, or whether they are intra-governmental and they operate with impunity because there's no way to do oversight on them, because officially they're not logging files that anybody can go find, and they're using our dollars to do it. I mean, it doesn't really make a difference. If you have people that are outside the chain of command and they're outside of being accountable, there's a couple things about it. Number one, they're going to be very, very interested in making sure that stuff stays quiet. And number two, the stuff they're doing is probably worth keeping quiet. And so, it lets all the worst conspiracies and all the people that want to think the worst things, which I would normally go out there and say, this is not likely. This story about prohibited access actually opens that up to being far more plausible than I would have ever given credit to until maybe a couple of weeks ago. And that's a rough thing to have wash over you after looking at this problem for now about 10 years. I mean, I've been working on this, the FBI and what's wrong with it, since 2016, ever since I showed up there.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a long time to look at a problem and have a brand new angle on it.
It seems uncrackable, and almost the type of thing that if you were to crack it, you wouldn't be around long enough to really get the information to the public. But I don't want to.
That's not wrong. No, but that, you know what, that's not wrong. So let me just throw one more little kind of conspiratorial thing for people to listen to, and they can have their minds blown or not. J. Edgar Hoover allegedly had blackmail files on lots of different prominent individuals. Now, I've had people that were sort of scholars of J. Edgar Hoover's life talk to me about this. And Mike Waller might be a good interview at some point if you want to talk about Hoover and how the FBI became what it is and why it's woke now, or why it was woke when it was. And one of the things that he kind of shared with me that I didn't really recognize is he didn't really do it to go lean on politicians per se. Hoover's mindset about having all the paper files that he supposedly had outside of his office, there's plenty of pictures that indicate that there were file cabinets, and there's, you know, contemporaneous accounts that he had all this information. It was to keep people from messing with the FBI. That was his baby. He built it up, and it did what he wanted. And it operated the way he wanted. And if anybody wanted to come and try to stop that, then he would step in and he would let them know that they were compromised in whatever way. And not in the way that, you know, not unlike what people think Jeffrey Epstein was involved in, or whatever the conspiracies are about Israel and all that. Okay. So if you have that as your mindset, when J. Edgar Hoover died, they got a new politically appointed FBI director, and we started getting them for periods of time, 10 years. And that was kind of like the thing. What had always happened, though, is that we had what's called a deputy director, which is the number 2. The deputy director represents the institution of the FBI, including the first deputy director, who was groomed all the way under J. Edgar Hoover and took over as the number 2 when Hoover left. Do you know who the first deputy director was?
I can't say no.
His name was Mark Felt. Now, some people will remember him by the code name Deep Throat, because he was the guy that helped bring down Nixon. And that was revealed as he was coming up on death. So interestingly enough, it sounds like, and that's one step, and I'd have to do a lot more digging to be able to figure out what the other deputy directors got involved in and what scandals may have been tied to what the FBI had for knowledge. But that's a pretty interesting thing, that the guy who was apparently famous for doing blackmail activity dies. The guy who steps in as the number 2, representing that institution to protect it, and that's what the deputy director does, ends up being a guy that brings down a U.S. president that was problematic to the intel service and so on. So for whatever it's worth, there's a deep rabbit hole for people to go and start digging on. And whatever the worst thing you think might be plausible, you now have a name for what it is and a mechanism by which it operates. And all of it basically allows you to start speculating on some of the connections, which we wouldn't have been able to say prior to, again, like I said, a couple of weeks ago with it publicly being released by the FBI.
God, that's a really heavy way to end it.
I ended my last phone conversation about this and I said, enjoy your nightmares, because because this is a governmental nightmare. It's the worst thing that you could think that your government could be involved in. Now we can't just say outhandedly, like, well, that's ridiculous. That's not true. It's like, yeah, it might be true.
Wow. Well, Kyle, I really wanted to talk to you all about our takes about Iran. I've been following your feed on it, and it's really fascinating to me. I think that, you know, it's something that a lot of people really care about, including this audience. But unfortunately, I think we're gonna have to save it for another time. But maybe by that point, you know, we'll find out if this is like sort of a dog walking thing, and it's really only going to last 4 weeks, or maybe by that point it'll be 3 months into it. Who knows? But you know, I really can't thank you enough for coming on and talking to us about this, talking to our audience about this. And you know, I really hope you're able to come back and, you know, we can flesh things out and have a bunch of new information to talk about. So appreciate it, and hope you have a great rest of your week and everything.
Thanks, bud. Yeah, I look forward to that. That sounds good.
Leverage.